Thank you very much. My paper would also be a little longer than expected, so I will enhance the confusion by shortening the first part by, so to speak, rushing through. The basic point is to make you aware of some problems. Not all of you are aware, because if you are thinking about works, then you have the work somewhere in the blue, and the rest becomes, I do not repeat all the different words we have used for that. The interesting part of my paper, at least from my perspective, is how to deal with compositions that show up in different versions that are so different that if you do not know the context, you understand how they belong together. We have seen a similar example with the toccata of which is known as Clementi's Opus 11, where you have to know a lot about background in order to see its position within the work of the composer. I have two topics, and they are closely related to each other. The order is opposite from what we saw on the title page. I would like to talk about uncommon titles of Mozart's instrumental works, in the sense that most of Mozart's compositions do not really pose problems to us. He composes sonatas, string quartets, and whatever. But there's a group of compositions, particularly from the Salzburg period, that has some special traditions and contexts that do not fit, as Mr. Keil pointed out, to the entire repertoire. And the question is how to deal with that. And the second is, if a work from this group shows up in different versions, how many additional problems do we have? To start with, I would like to say this is the most famous Mozart piece, for which we have the first page, because otherwise Balázs might argue that we should talk about the sonata in A major. So we have the Kleine Nachtmusik of Mozart, and for the cataloger the problem starts, what's the title of the work? It's not there. You have only the author's name, which is not the title, it's some sort of title. But fortunately Mozart wrote his own thematic catalog, from which we can derive the title, Eine kleine Nachtmusik, and Mozart was kind enough to underline it for you so that you can see it, even if you're a non-native speaker. So we have an individual title for this piece, but what is it really? In the new version of the Köchel catalog, which I have the burden and honor to be the copy editor and final shaper, we classify this piece as a divertimento, and tell you at the same time that most references in literature call it a serenade. If Joachim Brügge from Salzburg would be here, we could have 25 hours of discussion whether it's a divertimento or a serenade. But at this point, it should suffice that within the idea of genres, we regard it as a divertimento in Mozart's terms, but most people know it as a serenade. If you take the RISM help files, you will see that there's an entire bunch of words that are grouped together. So there is a superior category which is just called divertimentos, and there is a large list of words that are treated as synonyms. Interestingly, one is missing that you might expect in this context, which is partita, which is often used for divertimento type pieces in the 18th century. And what I found astonishing, we will see this later, it works only in one direction. So if you look for divertimentos, you get all this, but there is not a way to get back to the main group from that. A few more examples that have confusion. There's a serenade, which people are currently knowing, if at all, as a divertimento. And the reason why they know it as a divertimento is the autograph, which clearly says divertimento. The problem is only that it was not Mozart who wrote that, but someone in the 19th century who had no idea what a serenade or divertimento was for Mozart, and so it was the Offenbach view on this piece that it would fall in the category of divertimento. One of the most famous pieces by Mozart, because it has a unique title, is the Serenata Notturna. And before I have to discuss with Christine Blanken when the night starts, so when it's a serenade, when it's a notturno. The nice thing is the title doesn't stem from Mozart, but from Mr. Gleisinger and Offenbach as well. But unfortunately, nobody knows unless he is a specialist in Gleisinger's handwriting or reads catalogs not very thoroughly, and if the catalogs are properly written. You cannot always assure that. So, to make this group of remarks, to bring it to an end, this is what I would regard as some sort of definition for the specific Salzburg repertoire of Mozart. Divertimenti in Vienna may look different from the Haydn perspective and other words as well. So we have many things, and neither the cataloger, particularly not the user, can know all of that. You can read over this quickly. Just, I would like to make it clear that not all titles with Mozart are standard titles, so to speak, and that not all titles that are found in sources or in the literature are historically founded. And on the other hand, that even if titles are historically founded, nobody knows them, so it's not very helpful either. So we need both individual and, I think, other titles in order to get a little bit of clarity in these type of entries. I would like to come now to the main point of the argument, namely how to deal with works that are closely related but are not the same thing. And this is a non-exhaustive list of different types of versions that we find in Mozart's work. And one thing I have not even mentioned here is transposition, but you see there is plenty of possibilities. The easier ones are if only the scoring changes, so you may have additional or less parts, there may be replacement parts, there may be some sort of reductions, and the things become most complicated on the left-hand side, and I take only one at first sight very simple aspect, namely I have a work from which a selection of movements is taken out and found in a musical source. And yeah, the question, perhaps we should take this serious, when is a selection more than just an excerpt, and what consequences has it to our understanding of work in a broader and a more narrow sense? The example I would like to talk about is the Serenade in D, K320, known as Posthorn Serenade. And this piece of work, one of Mozart's really most interesting pieces and least known, is a 7-movement piece. And to reduce the confusion, I have already left out the 2 marches that go with that piece and would be at the beginning and at the end. This piece additionally survives in sources as a sinfonia with a standard way of 3 movements, fast at the outer movements and 1 slow movement. And this we find with other of Mozart's serenade. At least 5 of Mozart's Salzburg serenades survive in symphony versions, which may or may not contain also one of the minuet movements. In this particular case, Mozart also used the 3rd and 4th movements as a separate piece, as a concertante, as he calls it. And the really fascinating musical aspect of the serenades is they are basically symphonic works, but they are interspersed with concerto movements, so to speak. And here Mozart consistently took out the concerto movements, labeled them concertante, and this is also not the only case in Mozart's pieces. I leave this piece to the specialists because it causes extra problems, because we are talking about a serenade in D, but this concertante is in G, so that will not be our topic. We are only talking about the symphonia derived from that piece. Just to round this off, for the 3 versions, we have different sources. There is only one autograph score, which potentially, so to speak, also contains the symphonia and the concertante, although they are not specifically labeled like that. We have an original set of parts for the serenade and one manuscript copy, and we have very many copies of the symphony. If we look in the RISM entry with the search Mozart 320 divertimentos and throw out some things that do not belong with this piece directly, because there's the typical problem of K numbers, which have many variants, we find 21 sources that contain something of this piece. And all but 2 are the symphony version. There's only the autograph manuscript listed and the concertante, which was also from Mozart's library and is now in Frankfurt. If you make searches by other keywords, you end up with a much smaller number, and some of them do not really fit what you want to have. If you look for Mozart serenades, you get the autograph and something else. If you look for serenade without the final thing, you get 8 entries, but 7 of them are actually the symphony version. If you look for symphony, you get just a fraction. We were talking about 19, and even with Symphonia, you get only a small number. So you can only find the sources for the symphony if you're looking for Mozart K320 divertimentos, and then scroll down the list and see what they contain. In the symphony version is listed in RISM 19 times, most often as divertimentos, which is fine because in the sense of RISM, divertimentos is the genre for all serenades as well. But then you see different things, and they start from excerpts over arrangements and the combination of arrangements and excerpts, and basically it's always the same composition that we have. The confusion does not stem from RISM workers, but from the old version of the catalog, because there we only have the title serenades, which would, so to speak, be translated to divertimentos in RISM. And then I have left out many things, but we are talking about the manuscripts, and you see there, if you look through this list, all these Abschriften actually refer to symphony version. There is none that refers to the serenade, but it's nowhere probably stated that this piece survives as a symphony. You have to derive that. For our new version of the Köchel, we have made a decision, namely, first of all, that we tell people what the actual genre is. You may have seen the type Finalmusik in the list before. Then that it's known as a posthorn serenade. This is an original title, so to speak, and that there are 3 distinct versions of that piece, namely serenade, symphony, and concertante. They show up in one heading, but then we have separate entries for these entities. Here you have, so to speak, I have copied the header from the serenade and also give you now the beginning of the entry for the symphony with incipit so that you see which movements are used. And in the description, you will see, first of all, the sources or a selection of sources, and then later on in the commentary and explanation how things belong together. So the problems I have shown you are apparent, but the solutions are not. First of all, for someone who is looking for items, it would be helpful if the field other titles would be filled in more often, because there are people who assign, even as genres, you can assign more than one genre. Technically, I'm not sure whether it's allowed, but it's helpful. So if you say it's divertimentos and symphonies, then you are already getting closer. For practical purposes, for the Köchel, we want to separate this into 3 works. And now the question would be, should we assign it new numbers? But the conference is on work titles, unfortunately on work numbers, because then with Mozart catalog, we would certainly be also part of the game. Thank you very much.